Garfield has come to occupy a strange place in internet culture. The overweight, sarcastic orange feline has grown to become a monster. Thanks to subreddits like r/I'm sorry John, Garfield has morphed into this eldritch demon god, bent on destroying everything in his path, even the ones he loves, especially John. Now this all kind of started due to a YouTube channel called Lasagna Cat, which paired live-action Garfield comic recreations with schizo fever dream humor. From this came the popular fan comic I'm Sorry John, from which the Reddit gets its name, which sees Garfield become the house around John as he is engulfed it all. It's strange, to say the least. I personally don't find this type of Garfield media all that funny or interesting, and frankly it just grosses me out. But is this entirely unfounded? I don't actually think so. Several times in the pre-internet era, Garfield dipped his furry paws into the murky waters of horror, namely one of the all-time great Halloween specials, Garfield's Halloween Special, and even several times throughout the popular 80s TV show Garfield and Friends. I think of episodes like The Sludge Monster, or there's one in particular where Garfield gets larger and larger and just goes up and it becomes like a King Kong parody. Turns out to be a dream, nevertheless, definitely the precursor for the type of Garfield humor we see today. While this might no longer be the case, Jim Davis, Garfield creator, had complete control of Garfield in only one place: the original comic strip, the 3-panel newspaper funny page comic strip. Did Jim ever take Garfield into this realm of horror, this bizarre nightmare fuel area that we now find Garfield in today? Well, yes, he did. In the week before Halloween of 1988, Jim Davis wrote and drew what could be one of the most profound storylines in all of comic media, and especially in Garfield media. So let's dive into one of Garfield's most terrifying, soul-wrenching, and existentially dreadful adventures, as Garfield takes a step in the Twilight Zone. We see in the very first comic that something is different. There's no punchline or joke setup, just a mystery. Garfield doesn't feel right. He awakens in a place that just doesn't feel like home. Then we see that this comic is to be continued. This is really odd. Every other Garfield comic up to this point has literally just been a standalone joke with no implications that would stretch further into the future beyond the day's paper. The next comic, published the next day, shows Garfield looking for John and Odie. Garfield notes that he is alone, and a disembodied narrator says, "You have no idea how alone you are." Garfield tries to calm himself before we see an outside shot of the house, dilapidated and abandoned. Garfield comes to the realization he hasn't lived here for years, and neither has anyone else. Freaking out, he sees light from another room and runs to it. Entering the next room, he is excited to see John and Odie, who offer him some food. But as Garfield reaches for the food, the illusion breaks. He's back in the empty house. He's alone again. Our narrator says, "Locked fast within a time when he no longer exists, Garfield grapples with his greatest fear: loneliness." This next one's kind of heavy. Garfield's losing it. The narrator continues, "After years of taking life for granted, Garfield's shaken by a horrifying vision of the inevitable process called time. He has only one weapon: denial." Garfield cries out, "I don't want to be alone." Just then, the real illusion breaks. Garfield sees John and Odie, and John offers him breakfast. Garfield, a character known for eating, for the first time ever, denies food, and instead clings to John, and we're left with this final note from Jim Davis. "An imagination is a powerful tool. It can tend to memories of the past, shade perceptions of the present, or paint a future so vivid that it can entice or terrify. It all depends on how we conduct ourselves today." In the Twilight Zone. This comic pretty much speaks for itself. The message is pretty profound, and it was told in this sort of existential horror kind of way. But even though existential, it was very low-key and very personal to Garfield himself. And that's what I really like about existential horror. I'm not a big fan of giant cosmic entities that have serious repercussions for the rest of the planet and for our understanding of philosophy and religion as a whole. Not really into all that. I think at the heart of all of H.P. Lovecraft's stories, from which a lot of this Garfield imagery is kind of mocking, I guess, or imitating, we miss the big point, which is that each story focuses on a specific character and the specific horror that they feel, while the beasts are sort of secondary to the reactions of the protagonist of the story. However, that gets lost in modern translation to giant entities that are scary looking. This is why I love movies like The Lighthouse and love shows like The Twilight Zone, because they almost never have any implications for humanity as a whole. They're character-focused stories, and the important part of the story itself is how the character feels about a certain situation. I don't mean to discredit the incredible art that is put together on the r/I'm sorry John story subreddit, and there is an incredible video which actually inspired this one, which I will flash in front of me and also link in the description. While I cannot remember the name, it's a really, really great video essay, and obviously it inspired all of this. So I'm not going to sit here and spoon feed you what the comic meant. I think Jim Davis's final words speak for themselves. Garfield is something that is pretty personal to me. For my nostalgia, I was obsessed with the show Garfield and Friends. I watched just countless hours of any Garfield media I could get my hands on, the Garfield show, all of those animated Garfield movies, the movies with Bill Murray. I was all over it. Loved Garfield. So this is a really cool video to get to make, getting to explore a childhood friend. And I just want to throw this out there. There used to be a website called Garfield.com. It's gone now. I think it was a Flash website, so it's gone to the internet archives. But you could get on and you could play all these games. You could read Garfield comics. I remember just spamming the mouse until I got back to 1978. What a great site. I spent so many hours there as a kid, so just want to throw that out there. I don't know if anyone watching this remembers that site or not, but anyway, just want to throw that out there. I hope you will join us next time on Soul Carney while we participate in a classic Christmas tradition of telling ghost stories, submitted for your approval right here on Soul Carney.